How old were you when you first came to the movement? What
first came
to the movement, to the revisionism?
Oh, you're concerned with that?
What awakened you to the need to join any movement, and specifically the revisionist movement?
Because I joined other movements before the revisionist.
Okay, so?
No, I hadn't really. About the same time, maybe. I was 15 or 16. You're asking when?
Tell me the story. What happened? You were 15, you were 16, you were what? Playing stickball and the urge to become a follower of Jabotinsky?
No, look, if you want the whole story, I can give you a lot of details, but I don't know how important they are. See, I didn't know anything about Jabotinsky. I was a very young university student. The first year, the first month actually, at the same time that Jabotinsky came to South Africa, came to Johannesburg rather. And somebody on the steps of the university, I went to hear him speak in make his major speech in the town hall. And I was very impressed with it. I'd never heard anything like it in my life. But a day or two later, a fellow student, a guy who had immigrated from Lithuania, named Joseph Kagan, said to me that Jabotinsky is speaking at a group of youth, young people, this evening. If I thought if I would come along. So I went along, and Jabotinsky gave a talk, which I described in some detail in my book, Days of Fire. It opens the book actually to about 15 or 20 youngsters on the Betar movement. And that's how I joined Betar and was an active member in Betar for a couple of years, but I didn't like Betar particularly. The other people that I met there were all people from Europe, and their background was very different from mine. I was the only South African actually who stayed with me. I was the only one of two who came to that meeting who were South Africans.
The meeting was in Johannesburg?
Yeah.
And you were the only two South Africans?
Others were all immigrants from Europe.
What year are we talking about? What year?
1930. March 1930. And
what made you go to the first speech of Jabotinsky?
I don't know. I suppose I was told probably that he was listening to, or maybe I saw his name somewhere, maybe I saw an advert, I don't know.
Okay.
I remember only that I went to the meeting. And that it was a very impressive anything. The things I said, I never heard anything like it before in my life. That's why I went immediately, when I was invited, I went immediately to another meeting. I hadn't thought about joining anything up to them. And that's how I joined Betar. But I was not happy in Betar there. Nobody had worked out a program for people from countries like South Africa or England or any of the West. The Betar program originally was designed, as far as I can understand, to deal with problems, apart from the major problems of Zionism, but also to overcome local problems, for example, behavior and so on. Also, military or paramilitary training. Now, in South Africa, in those days, you had some weapons training in the schools, high schools. So I had that before. I didn't need now to start learning from the dog. And so what attracted me then, I was very obviously precocious was the revisionist movement, where the people who joined Betar were offered, were told of a weekly journal, which they could, to which they could subscribe. It was called a Nijlweg, a new way, and so I subscribed to it, and there I got my new Zionist revisionist education, because the people who wrote fairly regularly for it were Jabotinsky, Grossman, and Shechtman. And so I was very, very rapidly oriented in revisionist Zionism, and I need hardly tell you, it suited me. It's usually a question of your mindset, however young you may be. And so I became a member of the revisionist movement, and as I was a South African and literate, I think after about a year I became the secretary of the branch of the revisionists in Johannesburg.
What were your, when you were joining Betar and then the revisionist movement, what were your friends at university doing?
I had no special friends at university. I was in a peculiar position because I was younger by everybody else than everybody else in university, by at least 2 years. I had been fortunate, or I think unfortunate, in finishing my matriculation just before I turned 15, instead of being 17 or 18. So I had no peers in. I may have found some if I had stayed, if I had continued studies for 2 years. But I didn't. I only stayed 1 year. One of the reasons was that I joined Betar and the revisionist movement, because I became very active there. Also for other reasons, that everybody in my family thought I must study. I'm too young to go to work. For me, my brother and my sister had gone to work. Family was not well off. And I wasn't really happy about what they said I should study, and what could I study. The one thing that was attractive to them was study in teacher's seminary, where they gave you a loan to cover the you call it I don't know what you
tuition.
What?
Tuition.
Okay. And I didn't like the teaching and I didn't like the studies. I didn't study. And I had the Betar and then the revisionist movement on my neck. A very, very active revisionist movement. 1931 elections, I actually organized the central office of the revisionist party for the elections. And the revisionists won 2 seats, which was 25% of the South African quota. And this was an advance, and it was similar to the advance in other countries where revisionism had become considerably stronger after the 1929 riots in Jerusalem.
What was the you say that you were about 15 or 16 when you joined, and here you are organizing the elections and organizing the office and becoming the secretary. Or what was the among your peers in the party? How did they react or relate to a young?
They liked the idea because it took the job away from them, and then I was very bright. You see, I was very bright. I engaged in all the discussions here, and I was very willing to work to do any of the chores of the movement. I didn't appear in public and make speeches and so on, but I worked inside.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very useful to them, and they didn't see me as a competitor for their leadership positions. I was assuming something. I never discussed it with them, and it never struck me to think about it. But if you have a bright young man doing things that you otherwise you would have to do, I suppose you get him to do it. And there was no question of finances. Nobody offered me any money. In the meantime, I was studying mainly through the weekly nowadays. It was a wonderful instrument for the study of the political outlook of the business party. Wonderful. I suppose it was the best journal that I ever came across. You had three really very good first-rate publicists like Jabal and Grossman. Grossman even more than Jabal. Grossman participated more freely in this paper. And Sherman. They knew everything about Zionism, and they, in the course of the article, they taught everything. And so I became quite a knowledgeable individual on Zionism in general. That was 1930, 31. This is the period of the world crisis. And so when I left university, or rather when I did not return to university after a year, I had to go and look for a job. And unemployment was rife at the moment, at the time. And so it took me a whole year to find a job. And there you see nothing counted, except my age, which was very young. And so I took a very young job, sort of thing. As a clerk as you call it, in a tea company. And I think it was while I was working there that I got engaged in another organization. I, together with a friend named Morris Sevitz, two friends, Morris Sevitz and Isaac Goss, formed an organization called HaTehiya.
Isaac Goss?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You see, we were dissatisfied with the local Zionist youth movement, which was engaged only in social functions. They had no educational work at all in it. And we decided to establish a group that would give people a Zionist education, and in my case, of course, a particular Zionist education. Neither Sevitz nor Goss had any connection with the business party or with any other party. But all three of us had studied, had been to a rather higher level of Hebrew education than most kids got in South Africa. Kind of high school Hebrew education. As a matter of fact, we matriculated, Goss and I matriculated together in Hebrew. one of our subjects was Hebrew, which was not a usual subject in South Africa. And having decided that, we became very busy establishing this organization. And we used to have, this is all parallel to the revisionist thing. It wasn't associated in any way with the revisionist thing, but I found time for both. I became the secretary of this HaTehiya organization. We had 2 nights a week of lectures, Zionism, Jewish history, and Hebrew. And this was very expensive. We had to pay for the hall. We had a hall. We got quite a good response from the young people. Probably about 100 young people joined us. And we had to pay teachers. We three knew the best teachers in the city, and we got them to teach, to give lessons in Hebrew. But they all wanted payment for the profession. And so, although Sevitz was older than we were, Sevitz already was making a job, making a living on his own. He was 4, 5, or 6 years older than me. Had raised money somehow to get the thing started, but then it became difficult to carry on because we didn't have enough money. Sevitz came along with a proposal to me that we should approach a certain guy named Michael Haskell, who had gained a reputation in South Africa for being a very philanthropic, benevolent Zionist. And as it happened was known to be very opposed to Weizmann. This didn't influence our decision to go. His political view was not the reason why we went to Christian. As he was, we should give freely to organizations. We sent him some material. We published it, did a good deal of publicity for this movement, and asked for an appointment. So Sevitz and I appeared at Haskell's office in order to get a donation from him. Hardly have we sat down, then he launched into a violent diatribe against us, not as persons, but against the young people in South Africa, who, he said, were not doing anything for their people, who were sitting in comfort in South Africa while the Jews of Eastern Europe were in a horrible state. And what were we doing about it? And especially, he said, the youth of South Africa was not helping the only man who was really doing something to save the Jewish people. That man was Jabotinsky. Well, I was very angered by what he said, because I thought I myself was in the movement, the Jabotinsky movement, and Haskell had gone to the Congress the previous year as a representative of general Zionism. So I counter-attacked Haskell and said to him, how can you talk like that to us when you yourself were in the movement, were in general Zionists? You didn't support Jabotinsky. So he attacked me and said, I did more Jabotinsky not being in his party than you people that can be doing in his party. I mentioned that I was in his party. And so we started shouting at each other. And poor Mr. Sevitz was sitting there, he went as white as a sheet. He come here to ask a man 3 times our age for a donation. This idiot starts arguing with him, criticizing him. But Haskell, after a few minutes of this shouting match, stopped and said, gentlemen, I have nothing personal against you. And as for your movement, I've read all your literature, and there's a check waiting outside for you. Well, of course it is speculation, but I'm pretty sure this is the reason. To Haskell, my outburst was very, very pleasing. He liked it. He's the kind of guy we need in the business movement, you see. And Haskell also, I must say, after the first check, he more or less maintained, I suppose, 75% of our expenses paid for 2 or 3 years. And he himself, he was a bachelor, he must have been at the end of his 50s or must be around about 60. Would come sometimes to the meetings in the evenings. He got on very well with young people rather than older people. And I, meantime, had left my job. I didn't like the job, so I walked out. I'm not a low salary. It's difficult to calculate how it would the equivalent in today's money. Of course, this is 70 years ago, and I'd walked out. So I was without a job, and this had nothing to do with it didn't interfere with either organisation. But in the evening that Haskell came to one of the meetings, he said to me, "I hear that you're out of a job." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "What should I tell you? Why should I tell you?" He said, "I can give you a job." And Haskell gave me a job, and I became more or less a kind of political secretary to this rich Jew. And as it happens, a knowledgeable Jew and a friend of Jabotinsky's. It was much later in life that I discovered that he was probably Jabotinsky's greatest confidant, not in his immediate entourage. While I was working for him, I used to write. I used to do the typing for him with letters to Jabotinsky. So I also got an insight into some of Jabotinsky's problems there. And well, this continued until 1935. But meantime, in 1930, end of 33 or maybe 34, the movement, the pro-Nazi movement, grew up in South Africa. So after Hitler came to power, and the leader of the movement, a man named Betar, was started the campaign of propaganda, making speeches all over not all over the country, but rather starting his speeches in the southeastern part of the country, and having considerable response from the Afrikaner public. And he was spewing out the usual anti-Semitic stuff. Now, I must go back a little and tell you that the HaTehiya movement had a great effect, had affected greatly the Zionist leadership of South Africa. They decided that they must do something about reforming the youth movement, putting it on a different cultural level. And they had appointed a youth council for the whole of South Africa. And Haskell, because of his financial support for the movement, had been given 2 seats on this council. And so I was appointed a member of the youth council. And in fact, two members of the Youth Council, of course, Haskell went to a meeting and I represented him as well. Now the chairman, or the secretary of the Youth Council, the chairman was a member of the Zionist executive in South Africa. The secretary was a guy named Dunsky, whose brother recently died here. Dunsky was a good Jew, had no special politics. When this Weihart person announced that he was going to come to Johannesburg to speak, Johannesburg, I should tell you, was a comparatively Jewish town. 10% of the population was Jewish. There was a great Jewish influence in the town. Dunsky said to me, we can't allow this to happen. We don't want this Nazi come here and speak at the town hall. And so Dunsky, through the Youth Council, had a lot of connections. Also, he was connected with the general Zionist movement. He organized a group, I don't even know how large it was, of the young people, what they call the Schlägers, tough guys. And a plan was made to deal with this public meeting, with the preparations for the public meeting that this man Weihart was going to have. The leadership of the Jewish community had approached the government and had protested at permitting him to speak, but the answer was, it's free speech, we can't prevent him from coming. And also, one member of the government was probably sympathetic to him at least, Mr. Piro. And so we organized, well, the organizer was Dunsky, but I was the secretary, and I was the man communicating with people in regard to whatever they're going to do. Arrangements for meetings, and we were supposed to be doing this subterraneously. To cut a story, not a very long story, short, Mr. Weihart appeared in Johannesburg at the town hall, but throughout the hall, not sitting together, were probably 40 or 50 young Jews prepared for any action, and at least one of them had a revolver. Weihart started his speech, and as soon as he got to the Semitic section of his speech, the man with the revolver stood up, shot, made one shot into the air, which of course in this big hall, and the explosion in the big hall caused a panic. And the whole meeting broke up, and the police arrived, nothing, and the end was that Mr. Weihart did not appear again in Johannesburg. As a matter of fact, the movement started breaking down as a result. That's just one of the side issues of the period as far as I'm concerned. Now, Haskell was on good terms with probably several members of the government, as was the president of the revisionist movement in South Africa, a guy named Isaac Judas. He was other things. He was a farmer, a man who owned farms, or don't know what he did with them, and he was an old president of South Africa, and had connections with the party, with the Nationalist Party which had formed the government in 1924. And Haskell had his own contacts with him. Haskell had also paid for somebody for it. Wall paintings, what do you call them? Murals. In the South African house, which nowadays is the South African Embassy in London. murals. He got a Jewish painter to paint these murals in the South African house in South Africa. And so he had a number of good connections with the government. And I don't know whether it was Judas or Haskell, who was probably Judas, who persuaded the South African cabinet to appoint a representative in Palestine who would keep an eye on what the British were doing here and would report to the government of South Africa, who didn't like the British at all and could be persuaded not to be happy with the British policy in Palestine. And that's how it came about that Haskell was appointed actually a consul, honorary consul, we call it commissioner, the honorary commissioner for South Africa in Jerusalem. And I was appointed by the aforesaid honorary commissioner to be the secretary of his office in Jerusalem. That is how I arrived in Jerusalem. I didn't need a certificate for that.
What year was this? What year?
So I arrived in Jerusalem on the 12th of January 1936.
Okay.
And there I started a kind of double life. I had to be an official. I mean, there was a certain amount of business for South African. There were people who were interested economically, and there were people traveling from South Africa, from South Africa to Palestine. I used to issue the visas or passports or whatever was necessary. I became a consular official. That was only up to 12:30 midday. In the evening, I became associated with David Razil, who was in charge of the young Irgun in Jerusalem. I can't remember the details of time. The movement had been in existence for 5 years as a breakaway from the Haganah. And it was called at the time the National Organization or whatever. Some people had used the name Irgun, but not all. Early 1937, this was already in the period of the so-called Arab Revolt, which started soon after I arrived in Jerusalem. In April, I arrived in January, and the so-called riots began in April. The beginning of 37.
36.
Now, this is 36, but it was at the beginning of 37 that the crisis broke out in the Irgun because its leader and others had been persuaded that we must have a united front. And of course the problem was that we, Irgun, insisted on action, say, reprisals to all the terrorist actions that were being carried out by the Arabs. And the Haganah was carrying on a policy of Havlaga. All this you probably know. And these Irgunists were persuaded to join up with the Haganah, in fact to leave the Irgun and to go to the Haganah. That included the leader, a man named Tahomi, Abraham Tahomi. Now, at that point, Jabotinsky visited South Africa, and the people who remained in the Irgun, Brazil is one of the leaders, Brazil and in Jerusalem, and
Rosenberg.
Stern was in Tel Aviv. Discovered that I could communicate with Jabotinsky direct. Through Haskell, with whom I had an ordinary commercial code. Haskell and I had agreed that there were sometimes things that we might not want the British censorship to discover. So we used an ordinary commercial code for any such communication. So that it's not a very important job, but then that I maintained I established and maintained the connection of the Irgun with Jabotinsky through this code for the next couple of years, actually, while he was in South Africa and subsequently. I also was able to, I didn't officially, because there was nothing official or public about it, but in the case I didn't officially join the Irgun because I didn't want any complications in case I was discovered, and to make complications for the South Africans. I had to keep myself quite separate from any political activity. Well, we are now in 37. Because of the crisis here, the revisionist, I should say the Irgun was then subject to revisionist control. I don't say that the revisionists decided on every activity in Brazil was responsible for Jerusalem and Stern in Tel Aviv for operations for planting bombs and so on, but overall, it was revisionists who had the final say whether we should, how active we should be, how not be active we needn't be. Now, the crisis had arisen quite early on. To lead the Irgun, a man was brought from China. From Shanghai, rather, to be precise, because in Shanghai there was a kind of capitulations regime, by which there were 3 or 4 different police forces. There was a British, a Russian, a French, and a Jewish police force in China. And the head of the Jewish police force was persuaded to come to Palestine to head the Irgun.
Do you have another pen? The pen has gone out of ink.
There's a whole lot here. He was a man named Bitker, and made the impression of a really good soldier. He was tall and hefty, and had a commanding presence. But he didn't know any Hebrew, and he had little understanding perhaps of the people living here, the mentality of people. And he made a number of mistakes in his early stages. He was under the influence of a number of people who were not in the Irgun and who believed that the Irgun was not active enough. And so the And there was trouble. Some of these people robbed the bank or tried to rob a bank. You may know the story.
Yeah, I tell the story in my book.
Huh?
I tell the story in my book.
Yes. And so the revisionists and the revisionist executive, whatever they call themselves, and the Stern and Brazil decided that this was no good. We would be killing ourselves with organization. We had to have Mr. Bitker replaced. And so a messenger was sent to Jabotinsky, who was at that time working in Poland, to persuade him to dismiss Bitker. Now I want to tell you that what was actually
The messenger was sent to Jabotinsky.
Yes, no, there was something I wanted to add. Would you close this off for a moment? I had established a relationship with Jabotinsky personally. Soon after I joined the movement, I was sold a book in Yiddish called The Story of the Jewish Legion. And when I read it, I decided to translate it into English. I'd never done anything like that before in my life, and I didn't know how one handled it. I decided the thing to do was to send it off to Jabotinsky, who probably would find a publisher for it. Which I did, so that it was through the translation of his book, the Jewish Legion, that I established an epistolary relationship with Jabotinsky. You'll find he letters to me among the letters in 1934, probably 1934, 35, largely about the translation of the book, finding a publisher and so on. He had accepted the book as being good, needing some editing. Right. Now, in his visit to South Africa in 1937, he'd come to South Africa.
Did he do the editing himself?
What's that?
Did he do the editing of your manuscript himself?
I think so, yes. It was a question of perhaps finding the precise words of translation. I don't know. I know nothing about this. Now, when he came to South Africa in 1937, this was his second visit, he caused a whole revolution in South Africa. You know, the end result of his visit in 1937 and the second and third visit in 1938 is that the revisionists were elected as took over the leadership of the Zionist organization in South Africa from here. And when he came to South Africa, one of the first things he did was to establish a weekly journal. And through the journal, one of the first things that happened was that I was asked to write weekly articles. And when the journal was established, it was called the 11th Hour. And Jabotinsky used my manuscript to publish a weekly installment of the book in English. And then in May, when he was on the point of leaving South Africa, he wrote me a wonderful letter praising my articles and suggesting that I go back to South Africa and take over the editorship of the newspaper. I didn't want to do that. I didn't do it. And I'm not sure whether I replied to the letter or whether in a letter, or whether I gave him the reply when I met him in Egypt. He was on his way to England from South Africa, and he invited me, like he invited other people to come and meet him in Egypt. He wasn't allowed to come here.